What if one careless joke cost you your marriage, your reputation, and your peace? I thought it was funny when I teased my husband about his boss and me sharing a hotel room for efficiency. Everyone laughed, except him. I didn't realize that moment would be the beginning of the end, or that his silence would be the calm before something much colder and smarter, lawful revenge. I'm Maris Dalloway, 33, and I swear I didn't mean for a joke to end my marriage. It was just one of those offhand comments people make when they're trying to sound clever. I said it at a work lunch, loud enough for everyone to hear, that if hotel rooms ever ran out on business trips, I'd have to share a bed with Graham, my boss. Everyone laughed, except my husband, Evan. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting next to him. I told him he needed to relax, that he had no sense of humor anymore. I thought that would settle it, but it didn't. Evan wasn't the type to yell or argue. He just went quiet, which somehow made everything worse. When we got home that night, he didn't bring it up again. He washed the dishes, folded laundry, and acted normal. Too normal. I kept trying to make small talk, but his silence felt heavier than any fight we'd ever had. I told myself he was just embarrassed I'd made the joke in front of his colleagues, that he'd get over it. I even laughed about it with my sister Nina later, saying men couldn't handle confident women. She agreed and said I was just being playful. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The truth was, I'd been enjoying the attention Graham gave me. The way he'd compliment my work, joke about late nights in the office, and offer to mentor me over coffee. It felt harmless, until it wasn't. I liked how alive I felt around him, how he looked at me like I was still interesting. Evan didn't look at me that way anymore. He'd come home tired, quiet, focused on our son Noah and bills and deadlines. He'd stopped seeing me, or maybe I'd stopped letting him. Either way, something between us had gone dim, and that stupid joke was just my way of lighting a match. After that lunch, things started to shift. At work, people teased me about my favorite boss. Graham didn't discourage it. He'd smirk and play along, which made it all seem more real than it should have. I brushed it off, called it office humor. But when I caught Evan staring at me one night, that same unreadable calm in his eyes, I realized I'd stepped into something I couldn't laugh my way out of. He didn't say much. He never did. But I could feel it in the air. He was done being the punchline. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started on a Wednesday morning, the kind that feels harmless because nothing seems to be happening. Evan was drinking his coffee, reading something on his tablet, and I was half-dressed for work, searching for my phone under a pile of laundry. I made a casual comment about how I might have to share a bed with Graham if our company's hotel bookings got messed up again. I said it like a joke, my voice bright and teasing, trying to get a reaction. Evan looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, and said quietly that he didn't find that funny. I rolled my eyes, told him he needed to lighten up. He didn't respond. He just took another sip of coffee, calm and steady, as if I hadn't said anything at all. That silence got under my skin. It always did. I told him he had no sense of humor anymore, that everything I said turned into a problem. He said he just didn't see what was funny about sleeping next to his boss. The way he said it, calm, without anger, made me defensive. I told him everyone at work joked like that he should stop acting like I was doing something wrong. He said he didn't want to argue, so he didn't. He simply stood up, rinsed his cup, and left for work without saying goodbye. I told myself he was overreacting. Evan was always so careful, so steady, the type of man who thought patience fixed everything. It used to make me feel safe. Lately, it made me feel trapped. I wanted some spark, something that made me feel alive again, and instead I got quiet disappointment. At the office, Graham was already there, leaning over the front desk with his usual easy confidence. He asked how my morning was, and I said my husband was mad because of that silly bed joke. Graham laughed, said Evan must be a very serious man. I said, too serious sometimes. He smiled and said some men couldn't handle women with personality. I laughed, even though I knew I shouldn't have. I liked how he said it, smooth, light, like we were both in on something clever. Around lunch, we were sitting with a few colleagues when Graham brought the joke up again. He said, "Careful, everyone. Maris might claim the last bed if we ever travel again." The table laughed, and I did too, though part of me felt a pinch of guilt. Still, it was easier to smile than to correct him. I told myself it was harmless office banter. When I got home that night, Evan was sitting on the couch with his laptop open. He asked how work was, his tone polite but distant. I said fine, same as always. I mentioned Graham's joke at lunch, thinking if I said it first it would sound lighter. But he didn't smile. He just said, "So that's a story now?" I asked what he meant. He said it must be nice being the funny one at work. I told him he was twisting things, that it wasn't a big deal. He said, "It is when your co-workers laugh at me." I told him not everything was about him. The air between us turned sharp after that. I went upstairs, slammed a drawer harder than I needed to. When I came back down, he was gone. His phone and keys were still on the table, but his shoes were missing. I called out, no answer. 10 minutes later, I heard the garage door open and close quietly. That was his new way of leaving. Quiet, measured, like he wanted me to notice, without giving me the satisfaction of a scene. I called Nina later that night. I told her Evan had lost his sense of humor completely. She said men like him always take pride too seriously, that he was probably just jealous. I laughed, agreeing with her, pretending I believed it. But when I hung up, I noticed the light under the bedroom door. Evan was back. I opened it slowly. He was lying on his side of the bed, eyes closed, pretending to sleep. On his nightstand sat his notebook, open, a pen resting across the middle. I caught a glimpse of the top line, Household, March. His handwriting was neat, careful, and deliberate. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He made pancakes for Noah, kissed him on the head, and left for work early. I asked if we could talk later. He said sure, if I wanted. That answer, it sounded more like permission than interest. At work, things escalated without me meaning to. Graham called me into his office for a project review. The blinds were open, the door halfway closed. He asked if everything was okay at home, and said he hadn't meant to cause trouble with his joke. I laughed and said Evan could be a little touchy. Graham smiled and said, "That's how you know he loves you." I should have left it there, but I didn't. I said sometimes love feels more like control. He looked at me for a moment too long before changing the subject. By the end of the day, the office group chat had a new meme, a hotel bed with the caption reserved for Maris. Everyone thought it was funny. I laughed in the chat, sent a little emoji. Then I saw Graham typing something but stopping midway. Maybe he realized it had gone too far. That evening, when I got home, Evan was at the dining table again, his laptop open. I asked if he wanted dinner. He said he'd already eaten. I told him about my day anyway, forcing the cheerfulness. He nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Just sorting things." I leaned closer and saw the edge of a folder on the table labeled April, Budget Notes. Before bed, I tried to make him laugh again and said maybe I'd text his boss to book us separate rooms next time. He looked at me, expression unreadable, and said quietly, "Maybe don't go at all." I told him he was overreacting again, that he couldn't tell me how to do my job. He didn't argue. He just stood up, turned off the light, and went to the guest room without another word. I stayed in the dark for a long time, the silence pressing against my ears. Then, from down the hall, I heard a faint click, the sound of a door closing carefully. I told myself he just needed space, but something about the precision of that sound felt different. It was too quiet, too certain, like a door closing on more than just the night. The following week began, like nothing had changed, though I could feel the distance stretching tighter between us. Evan left early every morning, his coffee thermos filled, his face calm, his tone polite. He still kissed Noah goodbye, but not me. He wasn't cold exactly, just contained. It was the kind of silence that felt practiced. I told myself he'd come around, that men always cooled off after sulking long enough. At the office, the atmosphere around me had shifted too. Every time I walked into the break room, the chatter lowered just slightly. I told myself it was paranoia, but when one of the junior staff smirked and said, "Maris, are you booking the honeymoon suite again?" I realized the joke had grown legs. I forced a laugh, tossed my hair and said, "Depends who's paying for it." It was easier to play along than to look embarrassed. Still, I hated the way it made my stomach tighten. Later that day, Graham called me into his office. The blinds were half closed, sunlight cutting stripes across the desk. He asked if everything was okay at home. I said, too quickly, that everything was fine. He leaned back, crossed his arms, said some people in the office were taking things too literally. He smiled in that easy, charming way of his and said he hoped I knew he respected me. I said, of course, even though I wasn't sure either of us believed it. That evening, I met Nina for coffee. She asked about Evan, and I said he was still distant, acting like I'd done something terrible. She rolled her eyes, said, "You told a joke, not had an affair." I nodded, relieved to hear it said out loud. She told me to post something funny online, make light of it, turn the story into my own. "Control the narrative," she said. I laughed, liking the sound of that. So, that night, I did. I posted a photo of my hotel keycard from the last trip with the caption, "Guess I'll need to start booking double beds." Within an hour, co-workers were commenting with laughing emojis. Graham even left a winking face. I smiled at the screen, feeling a strange mix of power and guilt. Then I noticed one more like, Evan's account. No comment, just a like. My stomach dropped. He came home later that night, quiet as usual. I tried to talk, to fill the silence. I asked about work, dinner, anything to keep the air moving. He gave short, polite answers. Finally, I asked if he'd seen my post. He said yes. I asked what he thought. He said, "I think you're making a public record." I laughed, even though my throat went dry. "It's a joke," I said. He said, "So was the first one." I followed him into the kitchen, saying he was blowing everything out of proportion. He just stood there, leaning on the counter, letting me talk. When I finally ran out of excuses, he said quietly, "Do you even know why this hurts?" I told him he was being dramatic, that people were too sensitive. He said, "No, Maris, you are. You just don't like consequences." Then he walked past me, grabbed his jacket and left. The next morning, when I came down, the dining table was bare except for his coffee mug and a single notebook, open, face down, the corner of a page sticking out. I didn't touch it, but I noticed a word written in his small, precise handwriting. Documentation. I told myself it had to do with his job. At work, the meme about me had resurfaced. Someone sent it to the company group chat again, this time captioned Corporate Couple of the Year. I pretended to laugh, but my hands shook so badly I spilled my coffee. Later, I caught Graham arguing quietly with someone in HR about boundaries and miscommunication. When he came out, he smiled at me and said, "Don't worry about that little mix-up." I asked what he meant, and he said it was just a rumor, something about inappropriate closeness. He told me it would blow over. I nodded, pretending not to notice that he avoided eye contact. When I got home, Evan was sitting at the table with a file folder open in front of him. He didn't look up when I walked in. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Just keeping things straight." I asked if he wanted dinner. He said he'd already eaten with Noah. I said he could have waited for me. He replied, "You were busy." His tone was calm, not cruel, but the words landed like a door closing. After Noah went to bed, I tried to fix things again. I said we needed to talk like adults. He said, "We will. Just not tonight." I asked when. He said soon. That scared me more than if he'd said never. That weekend, I told myself I'd make it right. I planned dinner, bought a bottle of wine, even dressed up a little. He came home later than usual, quiet and steady, his expression unreadable. I poured him a glass, asked if we could start over. He thanked me for dinner, but didn't sit down. I told him I was sorry if I embarrassed him. He said, "You didn't embarrass me, you embarrassed yourself." I tried to laugh it off, told him he sounded like a manager. He said, "Maybe I learned from one." I didn't know what he meant until I saw the way he glanced at his phone, a notification flashing across the screen before he turned it face down. I asked if it was work. He said, "Something like that." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his calm face, heard that phrase, "something like that." Around midnight, I went downstairs for water and saw the light under the office door. I knocked softly, asked if he was still working. He said yes, just finishing some records. I almost asked what kind, but I didn't. I went back upstairs, heart pounding. When I climbed into bed, my phone buzzed. A new message from Nina. "You're trending in your office tag again. Someone reshared your post." I opened it, my hands trembling. The post had been screenshotted, captioned by someone else. "Imagine joking about sharing a bed with your boss and wondering why your husband's done." Thousands of likes. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Downstairs, the faint hum of the printer started up again, steady and low, followed by the sound of a door closing softly. By Monday morning, the joke wasn't just inside our office anymore. It had spilled into places it didn't belong. A client had seen the post. Someone from another branch sent an email with a laughing emoji in the subject line. I wanted to disappear, but instead I pretended I didn't care. Pretending had become my full-time job. When I got to work, the mood was strange. People looked at me differently, like I was a walking headline. Even Graham, who used to be so easy around me, seemed nervous. He called me into his office mid-morning, shut the door halfway, and said we needed to get ahead of the optics. I asked what that meant, and he said we should act more professional for a while, at least until people moved on to something else. I laughed and said, "So now I'm bad for business?" He sighed, said, "You knew what people would think." That made me angry. I told him he'd been the one making jokes, that he enjoyed the attention as much as I did. He said, "It doesn't matter what I did. It's about perception." That word, perception, hung between us like something sharp. He was already rewriting the story to make me the problem. I told him he was being a coward. He said, "I'm being careful." When I left his office, I could feel eyes following me down the hall. A few whispered. Someone laughed. I tried to keep my head high, but my throat burned. I told myself I didn't care what they thought, but I did. That evening, when I got home, Evan was helping Noah with homework. He smiled at our son, but not at me. I sat down beside them, tried to join in, asked what they were working on. Noah said something about writing a paragraph on trust. I froze. Evan's expression didn't change, but I could feel his eyes on me for just a second before he turned back to Noah. After Noah went to bed, I told Evan things had gone too far, that people were spreading rumors that weren't true. He said, "What did you expect?" I said, "Support, maybe." He asked if I even knew what that word meant. I told him he was being cruel, that I'd already apologized. He said, "No, you explained. There's a difference." I tried to make him angry, to force him into a fight, because fights I knew how to handle. Silence I didn't, but he just stood there, calm as always, and said he was tired. When he went upstairs, I noticed his laptop bag on the counter. The top was unzipped. Inside was a neat folder labeled Household April. I stared at it for a long time but didn't touch it. The next day, things got worse. At lunch, I overheard two co-workers talking in the break room. One said, "HR's looking into it." The other whispered, "The boss said it was just a joke gone too far." They both laughed. When they saw me, they fell silent. I forced a smile, grabbed my salad, and left. Later that afternoon, Graham sent me a message. "Need to talk after hours." My stomach twisted, but I stayed. When everyone left, he came to my desk and said, "This isn't sustainable." I said, "You mean me working here?" He nodded. He said the company couldn't afford the distraction. He tried to sound kind, said he'd give me a good reference if I resigned quietly. I told him he was unbelievable. He said, "You brought this on yourself, Marius." I laughed, a sharp sound I didn't recognize, and told him he was afraid of his wife finding out he'd enjoyed it too. He didn't deny it. He just looked tired and said, "You should go home." When I got home, Evan was sitting on the balcony. He didn't look surprised to see me early. I told him what happened, expecting him to take my side, to at least pretend outrage for me. But he just nodded, said he wasn't surprised. I asked if he thought I deserved it. He said, "Deserve? No. Cause? Yes." I snapped that he sounded like a judge. He said, "Someone has to be fair." I accused him of loving this, of enjoying watching me fall apart. He said quietly, "I don't enjoy any of this." I told him I didn't need his pity. He said, "Good. You won't have it." Then he stood up, walked inside, and left me sitting there in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. Around midnight, I heard him in the living room, typing something. Papers shuffled. A low hum. The printer again. The sound stopped, then a soft drawer close. It was the kind of quiet that meant a decision had already been made. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. A sticky note sat on the counter. "Taking Noah to school. Back later." The words were simple, but the way he'd written them, steady, deliberate, felt like distance made visible. At work, my resignation email went out that afternoon. HR called it a mutual decision. I packed my things in silence. As I left, someone said under their breath, "Guess she finally ran out of beds." I kept walking. I didn't cry until I got to my car. When I got home, Evan and Noah were in the yard, tossing a ball back and forth. They looked peaceful, like a picture from someone else's life. I stood at the window watching them, trying to figure out when I'd stop belonging in that moment. After dinner, I told Evan I didn't understand what was happening. He said, "That's the problem. You think it's just happening to you." I said I wanted us to move past this, that we could still fix things. He looked at me and said, "You can't fix what you keep defending." Before I could answer, Noah came running in with his school tablet, showing us a message from a classmate's parent. Someone had sent them the meme. Evan told him gently to go to bed. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding. After Noah left, Evan turned off the tablet, set it on the counter, and said, "Enough." His tone was final, soft, but absolute. He walked past me to the hallway, stopping only to pick up a stack of papers from the side table. I asked what they were. He said, "Notes." Then he went into the office and closed the door. The sound of the latch echoed through the house, slow and certain. I stood in the kitchen staring at the closed door, the weight of silence pressing down again. Then, from inside, I heard the faint scrape of a pen against paper and the quiet buzz of his phone vibrating on the desk. Something in my chest sank. I knew whatever he was doing in there, it wasn't about us anymore. It was about ending us the right way. By the weekend, it was like living with a polite stranger. Evan still made breakfast for Noah, still folded laundry, still said good morning, but none of it felt warm. It was all routine, efficient, practiced, careful. I told myself at least he wasn't yelling, that calm meant things were improving. But that calm had edges. It wasn't peace, it was distance wrapped in good manners. Saturday afternoon, Diane invited us to dinner. I didn't want to go, but Evan said it would be good for Noah. His tone left no room for argument. When we arrived, Diane was in the kitchen setting the table, smiling too tightly. She hugged Noah, hugged Evan, then turned to me and said, "You look tired, dear." It wasn't an observation, it was an opening move. I told her I'd had a rough week. She said, "We've all heard." The conversation at the table was stiff at first. Diane talked about her garden, Evan's brother talked about his promotion, and I laughed at all the right places. But then Diane turned the topic toward me. She asked if I was still at the company. I said no, that I'd moved on. She nodded slowly, then said, "Sometimes leaving is the only way to clean up a mess." Evan didn't intervene. He just kept eating, quiet and steady. I wanted him to defend me, to say something, anything, but he didn't. Finally, I said I'd made a mistake, that people had overreacted. Diane looked at me, calm and firm, and said, "Some mistakes echo, Maris. They don't just fade because we wish them to." I told her she was judging me without knowing everything. She said, "You're right. I only know what's public." That made everyone else go silent. I excused myself, muttering that I needed air. Outside, I stood by the porch steps, breathing hard. I texted Nina, telling her I was done with Diane's little interventions. She replied instantly, "They're just jealous of your confidence. Don't give them power." I stared at the message until the words started to blur. Inside, I could hear laughter again. Evan's voice, low but relaxed. He was fine without me in the room. When we got home later, Noah asked why Grandma had been mad. I told him she wasn't mad, just old-fashioned. He said, "She told me Daddy's sad." I asked what she meant, and he said, "She said he's tired of being embarrassed." My throat tightened. I told him grown-ups say things they don't mean. He looked at me for a long time before shrugging and running upstairs. That night, I found Evan in the living room with his laptop open again. Papers were spread across the coffee table, all in neat piles. I asked what he was doing. He said he was sorting through bills and budgets. I told him he should take a break, that he was overworking himself. He said he liked keeping things in order. I asked if that included me. He looked up then, meeting my eyes for the first time in days, and said quietly, "That's exactly what this is about." I told him he was talking in riddles. He said, "Maybe you'll understand soon." I laughed, partly out of fear, and said he was being dramatic. He didn't argue. He closed his laptop, stacked the papers neatly, and said, "I'm going for a walk." I followed him to the door, asking if he wanted company. He said no. When he came back, I pretended to be asleep. I heard him moving around in the hallway, opening drawers, closing them softly. Then, silence. Sunday morning, I tried to reset things. I made pancakes, put on music, acted cheerful. Evan sat with Noah, smiling at him, listening to every word he said. But when I tried to join in, he went quiet. I told him we couldn't keep living like this. He said, "We won't." I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. Later, we took Noah to the park. The sun was out, children running everywhere, the sound of laughter everywhere except between us. We sat on a bench watching Noah play. After a few minutes, he ran over, panting and smiling. He said, "Mum, is it true you slept with Daddy's boss?" The words hit like a slap. I froze. Evan didn't move, didn't speak. Noah looked confused, waiting for an answer. I said, "Who told you that?" He said, "A kid at school. His mum showed him something online." I turned to Evan, expecting him to defend me, to tell Noah not to believe gossip. But he just said, "Go play for a bit, buddy." Noah hesitated, then ran off. I whispered, "Why didn't you correct him?" Evan said, "Because he'll see the truth for himself eventually." My voice shook when I said there was no truth to see. He said, "Then this shouldn't bother you." We sat there in silence for a long time. I watched the trees moving in the breeze and hated the way he looked so composed. Finally, I said, "You're punishing me." He said, "I'm protecting myself." I told him that sounded like something you say before leaving. He said nothing. When we got home, he went straight to the guest room. I stood outside the door, listening. Papers rustled, drawers opened. Then a soft hum, the printer again. It printed for nearly a minute before stopping. When I knocked, he said, "Not now." His voice was calm, polite, final. That night, I lay awake listening to the faint sound of him typing. I thought about the way Diane had looked at me, the way Noah had asked that question, the way Evan had said, "protecting." My mind spun with panic, anger, guilt, and confusion all at once. I wanted to wake him, to make him talk, to make him feel something. But when I finally got up and opened the door, the guest room light was off. Only one small thing caught my eye: his watch sitting on the table beside a closed folder labeled May. The handwriting was neat as always. I stood there staring at it until my eyes burned. Then I turned away, trying not to notice the chill in the air that came from a man quietly preparing to let me go. From down the hall came the soft tap of Noah's footsteps. He peeked around the corner, sleepy-eyed, and whispered, "Mom, are you and Daddy fighting again?" I said no, forcing a smile. He nodded, yawned, and said, "Daddy said he's fixing everything." The words made my stomach twist. I tucked him back into bed, whispering goodnight, but my hands were shaking. When I went back to my room, the printer light downstairs blinked once before going dark. I stood in the doorway, holding my breath, listening to the stillness of a house that no longer felt like mine. By Monday morning, Evan's calm had hardened into something I didn't recognize. He wasn't cold or cruel. He was measured, deliberate, like a man rehearsing a speech no one else could hear. He moved through the house quietly, making breakfast, checking the locks, leaving for work on time. Every movement looked like purpose. I tried to keep up, to pretend everything was normal, but every time I opened my mouth, he gave the same short answer. "We'll talk soon." I hated that phrase. It wasn't a promise. It was a delay. At lunch, I met Nina at a cafe. I told her the family was turning against me, that Diane was probably feeding Evan ideas. Nina said I was spiraling, that I needed to post something light online again. "Reclaim the joke," she said. I told her no, that the joke wasn't funny anymore. She raised her eyebrows and said, "You're finally scared." I told her to stop. She said she was just being honest. When I came home, Evan was in the home office. The door was half open. Inside, his desk looked different, neater, emptier. Only a few folders remained, each labeled with precise handwriting: household, finances, Noah. My chest tightened when I saw that last one. I asked what he was working on. He said, "Just clarifying things." I asked what that meant. He said, "Making sure everything's handled properly." His voice was calm, his face unreadable. I laughed a little too loudly, said, "You make it sound like we're dissolving a company." He looked up and said, "In a way, we are." I asked if he was threatening me. He said, "No, I'm being careful." I followed him into the kitchen, words spilling out faster than I could think. I told him he was acting paranoid, that everyone makes mistakes, that I hadn't done anything worth all this. He said, "That's the difference between us. You measure worth by what's public. I measure it by what's private." I told him he was just trying to make me feel guilty. He said, "No, you already do." I snapped, called him self-righteous, told him he wasn't a victim. He just looked at me, calm as ever, and said, "You're right, I'm not. That's the point." He walked past me to the living room, picked up a folder from the table and slid a few papers inside. His movements were so slow, so precise that I wanted to scream. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Preparing for peace." I said, "You mean leaving?" He said, "No, I mean ending chaos." I told him he couldn't just erase me from his life. He said quietly, "You already erased yourself. I'm just sorting what's left." Then he took the folder and placed it in his bag. That night, He didn't sleep in the guest room. He stayed downstairs. I heard him pacing once or twice, the soft shuffle of papers, the faint click of his pen. Around midnight, I crept halfway down the stairs. He was sitting at the table, writing something in that same neat handwriting, a small desk lamp casting a pool of light around him. He looked peaceful, which terrified me more than anger ever could. When he finally noticed me standing there, he didn't flinch. He just said, "Go back to bed, Maris. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I asked what he meant, but he didn't answer. He closed his notebook, turned off the lamp, and walked past me without another glance. His hand brushed against mine, steady, warm, final. As the sound of his footsteps faded up the stairs, I stood in the dark kitchen, my pulse echoing in my ears. The printer light blinked once, then went silent. Somewhere inside that quiet, I realized it wasn't a bluff this time. Whatever Evan had been preparing, it was already in motion. His voice from upstairs, calm, almost gentle, saying, "It's time to handle this properly." Then the sound of a drawer closing. The next morning, he asked me to meet him downtown at 10. I thought it was about counseling. I wore something soft, hopeful. But when I arrived, he was standing in the courthouse lobby, calm as ever. A man at the desk handed me an envelope, petition for dissolution of marriage. I looked at Evan, whispering that we could fix this. He said, "It's already fixed, fairly." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me holding the papers, my hands trembling. The lobby lights flickered once, and for a second I saw my reflection, alone, stunned, out of jokes. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.